one of the Islamic world's most important scholars. Imran Hosein, I should call him Sheikh Imran Hosein because he has more than earned that accolade, is perhaps the Islamic world's leading eschatologist. Have you ever watched Christian Sunday morning people talk about the end times? Well, you can hear a vastly more informed, articulate, and sophisticated version of that kind of discourse by listening to Sheikh Imran Hosein. And many, many people do, not just Muslims. People from all faith backgrounds or no faith background find what Sheikh Imran has to say is very, very important and relevant to today's issues. Whether or not you are a true believer in the scriptural interpretations that he weaves in, you have to admit that Sheikh Imran Hosein is doing brilliant work. He's the author of Gog and Magog in the Quran and many other great works, a fantastic interpretation of Surat al-Kahf. Let's go ahead and play the recording that we just made a couple of days ago for this conference of a special interview with Sheikh Imran Hosein. He wasn't able to do it live, so we have a pre-recorded discussion with him, and I think we can go ahead and cue that up right now. Hello, we are at the False Flag Islamophobia Conference, or rather recording a video for the False Flag Islamophobia Conference in Paris, December 12th. This is a reaction to the banning of an academic paper for the Islamophobia and Civil Society Conference. I'm Kevin Barrett. My paper was originally accepted by the committee for that conference, which is scheduled for the 11th of December in Paris, and we still don't know whether it's actually going to be held. But in the wake of the recent events in Paris, that is the Friday the 13th of November false flag or terror attack, take your pick, that paper became too hot to handle, and the committee notified me that my paper was no longer acceptable for presentation at the conference, even though it had originally been accepted. So we are hosting an alternative conference, the False Flag Islamophobia Conference, to examine the question of what is the role of false flag attacks in the construction of Islamophobia and the larger historical context around this question. Here to speak with us is Sheikh Imran Hosein. Sheikh Imran Hosein is widely recognized as the Islamic world's leading expert on eschatology and its relation to current events. He is a brave truth speaker who spoke out boldly and forthrightly about the apparent false flag attacks in New York on September 11th, 2001, and was essentially exiled from the United States for having done so. He's probably the leading Muslim authority to address this question, the leading Islamic scholar that we could ask about this question of Islamophobia, false flags, and the larger context. So, assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Imran.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Kevin, I'm honored to be interviewed on this very important subject, and I'm happy that you are persisting with the presentation on Islamophobia, even though your paper has now been considered to be too hard to handle. But the truth must be proclaimed without regard for consequences.
I mean, so when you look at this series of apparent deceptions designed to incite people to create fear, to trigger wars, rollbacks of civil liberties, to turn the West into a garrison state, you see that these false flags are actually becoming very common. And although Islamophobia is one of the purposes of these false flags, there's a wider context as well.
Yes, Kevin, I'm very happy that you have directed attention to the wider context, because I would like that our listening audience or viewing audience should recognize that it's not just Islam that is being targeted, not at all. Orthodox Christianity is also being targeted. Orthodox Christianity, which of course is led by Russia. The attack on the Russian aircraft in Syria, and the cover-up for that with a mountain of lies, shameless display of lies by the Turkish Prime Minister and the Turkish government, to no one's surprise really, because they're simply doing what the Ottoman Empire did before them, waging a relentless so-called jihad on Russia on behalf of the West. So it's not just Islam and Muslims who are being targeted. The larger picture is one in which we recognize that Orthodox Christians are also being targeted by these false flag attacks. And in order for us to locate that which explains this phenomenon of false flag attacks and the increasing frequency with which they are now occurring, in fact, I anticipate that as ISIS people go back home, you know, in order to become a member of ISIS, you've got to take a pledge of allegiance to the leader. And if the leader tells you to kill, you've got to kill. So these are time bombs that are going back home from the battlefield. And when they go back home, they lie low until the ISIS commander gives them an order to commit an act of terrorism. And then they will do it because they are obliged by religious law to do it because they took a pledge of allegiance to that. So I'm anticipating an avalanche of false flags that are going to come in the future with these silent people returning home, members of ISIS from all over the world, with eyes and yet they cannot see, with ears they cannot hear, with hearts who cannot understand. They're just like cattle. And I'm sad to say so, but it seems to be that the Salafi methodology is playing a very significant role in creating this huge universal herd of cattle who are now becoming time bombs for future false flags.
And these people, of course, are patsies or participants in false flags that are actually set up in some cases or assisted by Western authorities.
Oh, well, ISIS is created by the Zionists, the Mossad, and ISIS is created by the CIA, and they're the ones who do the planning, and they're the ones who pull all the strings from behind the scenes. So it is the Mossad who no longer have to send their men on the line. They're going to have Muslims who are going to function as guinea pigs, acting on their behalf, committing an avalanche of false flag acts of terrorism, which I'm anticipating to start very soon. What is the role that these false flags are playing? And what is the mission? What is their mission? What is their goal? We have to look at the larger picture to understand why they're using false flags. And then finally, we'd look at what are the consequences for them. Those who practice false flags, what is the price that they will eventually pay? Our eschatological perspective is one in which we recognize that that little island off the coast of Europe did not become a ruling state in the world by accident. No. Napoleon had contemptuously dismissed Britain as a nation of shopkeepers. Britain had never played any significant role in Europe until suddenly a scientific and technological revolution came with Britain leading the way, and it gave to Britain a military technology and military power which to be able to have ships which no longer dependent on the wind. And Britain eventually emerged as a ruling state in the world. And not only in terms of military technology and military power and control over naval bases around the world, but also with Britain becoming the financial capital of the world. The transfer from a monetary system of gold and silver coins now to a banking system, the Bank of England. And Britain becomes a financial center of the world, money lender of the world par excellence. Pax Britannica had a very mysterious relationship with the Holy Land. And I need to remind our viewing audience and listening audience of only the Balfour Declaration of 1917, where Britain, which is a secular state, pledges to work for the establishment of a Jewish national home, a religious state in the Holy Land. How do we explain that? And then the passage from Pax Britannica to Pax Americana, they call it Pax, but it's not peace. It's actually war and a mountain of lies and oppression. And the United States of America takes over from Britain, the US dollar takes over from the sterling pound, And the United States maintains also this very mysterious relationship with the Holy Land, with the State of Israel, and becomes a protector of Israel until Israel grows and grows and grows to become the equivalent of a superpower. And now we are located at that moment in time, Kevin, when we see from our eschatological perspective the United States in a state of irreversible decline, the US dollar on its way out, and a third state emerging to replace the United States, which we recognize to be Israel.
Now, could this partly explain why we're seeing so many false flags targeting Muslims and Islam? Because Israel is, of course, created in the heart of historically Islamic Holy Land. It seems odd, doesn't it, that this tiny little country whose problem with Islam is really a local issue for their 10 million population, 5-6 million Jews in Israel, but somehow the entire West, even the world, has been hijacked into a kind of a global war on Islam. That they call a global war on terror.
Yeah, that's right, Kevin. Israel is located right bang in the middle of a sea of Islam, surrounded by Muslims. And so Islam poses for Israel the first and most important threat. But in addition to that, Israel is not, the Jews are not the only ones who are with a claim to Jerusalem. In addition to the Jews, your Christian claim to Jerusalem. All right? And that Christian claim to Jerusalem is not to be exclusively Western Christian, but also Eastern Christian, Orthodox Christianity. And that's why we see that the dual-pronged attack on both Muslims and Orthodox Christians. Israel perceives both of these to be the most important threats to a Pax Judaica, which is to replace Pax Americana. When we look at the emergence of Pax Britannica, we see that it took place with great wars, large numbers of people being killed. And then we see the passage from Pax Britannica to Pax Americana and the two big world wars, millions of people killed. And then we see the Pax Americana stamping its bloody feet around the world with millions being killed. And now the passage from Pax Americana to Pax Judaica, and we share with the listening and viewing audience our perception that this passage cannot take place without the greatest war of all. The Christian eschatology recognizes it as the Armageddon, and Islamic eschatology recognizes it as the Melhama. And in order for this passage to take place, in order to take the world to this great, great war that is to come, and save the Jews from being blamed for that war, you need to have a lot of deception at work. And my first comment is that the false flags are meant to shift the burden, shift the blame, put the blame on an innocent people, so that the real masterminds, the ones who want to rule the world, who are taking us to nuclear war, which is going to devastate mankind, and most of mankind will not survive, that at the end of that great war that is coming, and it is so soon that I anticipate it's probably going to be a year from now, or even less than that. At the end of that great war, the world will not be hunting down Jews to kill them and blaming them for what has happened. So you have to put the blame on someone else. And this is why I think this is the first comment I want to make for Islamophobia, to put the blame on Muslims. That we are the ones who are posing a threat to mankind. We are the ones who are a menace to mankind. And therefore, whatever big, big tragedy occurs in the future, we are the ones who are going to be blamed for it.
And do you think that the two events in Paris this year, which both appear to have been false flags, are somehow tied into the role of France in all of this? Because France, number one, has the biggest Jewish community in Europe with 500,000 Jews, and then secondly, France is the capital of world secularism and has been since the French Revolution. The French body politic essentially is held together by a shared agreement among the majority of French people to oppose religion, specifically Catholicism. That's been the center of gravity of French politics for 200 years. But now there's no more Catholicism really in France to hate, so they need somebody new to hate. And it appears that these two false flags have been staged in part to rally the French people behind a new kind of hatred of a different religion, and for other reasons as well. What do you think?
Yes, I agree with you, Kevin. I think that's a very valid analysis. I would like to add to that, however, that the NATO is moving incrementally towards war with Russia. The target is nuclear Russia, because everything that they have tried has failed. They seduced Russia into the First World War with a promise of Constantinople. And when Russia was within an arm's length of Constantinople, they didn't want Russia to get Constantinople. So they brought in the Bolshevik Revolution and liquidated the family of the Tsars, and then brought communism and the Soviet Union, which butchered Orthodox Christians for 60, 70 years, and brought into being the world's first atheist state. Russia's heart is spiritual. Their heart in the Western world is barbarian, but Russia's heart is spiritual. And they brought communism and the Soviet Union to try to destroy that spiritual heart of Russia. And they gave to the Soviet Union military nuclear technology. They gave it, they transferred it, so that the Soviet Union could become the pride of the Russian people. And it did become, in some respects, the pride of the Russian people. But then eventually they planned their plan, and Allah planned his plans. And the Soviet Union collapsed, and communism is in the garbage bin of history. Then they tried with Yeltsin to see how they could steal Russia's wealth and reduce Russia to poverty. But even that didn't work. And then now Russia is returning to Orthodox Christianity, and Russia is flexing her muscles and saying, we're not afraid of you. And they can't tolerate this. But the most important thing of all is that Russia is threatening their control over money. The BRICS attack on the petrodollar monetary system is the most dangerous threat that they're facing. And this is why they have to attack Russia, to force Russia's submission to their diktat. And because China is supporting Russia, the war will be on China as well. Now, how do you move towards that world war? The American people have had enough of wars, and it's going to be very difficult to market this to American public opinion. The British also are fed up with wars, and it's going to be very difficult for British government to market a world war to the British public. So I think, Kevin, I may be wrong, but this is my opinion, that they chose France because they felt they had a better chance with French public opinion. And so the first, what's called the Charlie Hebdo attack took place to prepare French public opinion. And it was a stupendous success. They had 45 heads of state marching within hours on the streets of Paris. And the French were duped. The French were duped. And the mainstream media, of course, once they have the mainstream media, they don't care about the alternative media now. The mainstream media is going to hold public opinion. And so when they felt that French public opinion had been sufficiently mobilized, they could come with the second one now. And the second one, which just occurred in November, I believe was meant to push France into a greater military role in Syria and Iraq, and to spearhead the effort so that the United States and Britain can enter on the coattail of France. And this is what is happening now. So it's an incremental movement towards war with Russia, and the pieces are all falling in place now. And the pity about it is, when this war takes place, I don't think there's going to be any Europe left after it, and North America. The people won't be able to live in that part of the world. So they're being taken for a ride, and this Islamophobia conference should try to wake up people to the fact that you're being taken for a ride, and at the end of the day, you won't be able to live in North America. You won't be able to live in Europe. These places will not be habitable. Now, the other point I'd like to make is that they are committing false acts of terrorism and putting the blame on Muslims. But our perspective is that we who have faith in the one God, the God of Abraham, and every Jew believes in the God of Abraham, every Christian believes in the God of Abraham, has created this world as a moral order. This is not a frivolous world. This is not a world which is moving helter-skelter in the historical process. No, it is a moral order. And the implication of being a moral order is that truth must eventually emerge triumphant in the world. The implication of the world being a moral order is that those who are now committing false flags acts of terrorism with a mountain of lies, we say to them, Kevin, that your false flag chickens are one day going to come home to roost. Your false flag chickens are one day going to come home to roost. And monstrously evil acts of terrorism are going to take place. And you will be blamed for it. And you're going to pull your hands up and say, no, 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 we didn't do it. But nobody will believe you at that time. Because you are preparing the way now for your own slaughter tomorrow. In fact, mankind will be so fed up with you. Mankind will have so much hatred for you tomorrow because of what you're doing today, that we say to you, tomorrow even the trees and the stones will speak, and I'll call on mankind to come and punish you.
You see that happening after a great war?
Not immediately after the Great War, because I am saying to you that ISIS is preparing the way for an avalanche of false flags to come. That every single member of ISIS who returns home from the battlefield there in Syria and Iraq and returns home is a ticking time bomb, because he's taken a pledge of allegiance to the leader, and the leader is himself being pulled by the strings led by the Mossad and the CIA. So the Mossad and the CIA are to use all of these people, Muslims, sincere Muslims, but misguided, returning home from the battlefield, and use them as time bombs. And when the order is given to commit an act of terrorism, to assassinate someone, they're going to do it, because they have a religious duty now to obey the leader. So then they're not going to have any problems now. They don't have to train people because they're going to have Muslims committing acts of terrorism that they would plan for them.
Interesting, because in the Paris attacks on Friday the 13th of November, it appears that it may have been a hybrid attack in which there were some ISIS-type people from Muslim backgrounds who were involved, but also some professional white mercenaries who were blamed for the shooting at least one of the restaurants. And they've disappeared completely from the reports, from the headlines, from the French government's inquiry. And likewise, it does seem that some of the ostensibly Muslim patsies may have been manipulated. That is, the people who blew themselves up outside the stadium appear to have gone off away from other people and simply blown themselves up, which is a kind of a strange thing for them to do. Some have speculated that they may have been blown up by remote control. And then this latest thing in San Bernardino, it appears there that there are at least 2 witnesses who clearly saw that there were 3 white paramilitary guys carrying out the shooting as a paramilitary operation. So it actually wasn't the Muslim couple that's been blamed. So it seems like there's a sort of a possibility of hybrids in which patsies sometimes actually do some shooting and sometimes they don't, but that the paramilitary forces and their controllers are really the ones who organize these things.
The one that took place in November in Paris was far, far, far too important, strategically important, because it is meant to prepare the way for war with Russia. So they could not have left that to amateur Muslims who are angry with the West. No, you had to have had very, very professionally trained people to commit those acts of terrorism in Paris. But in addition to that, you must have a cover, and you'll have these Muslims who can be used as a cover. But Kevin, I don't think they need this for the future. Once they have their forces in place, that Britain and United States and France and Germany are in Russia, in Syria and Iraq. NATO is there. The pieces are all in place now. It's just one shot. Another Russian airline, for example, shot down, and that's it. The war begins, and it can begin any time now. The pieces are all in place. They don't need these big acts of terrorism anymore. What they need is to continue the Islamophobia with the avalanche of acts of terrorism, and I think ISIS is going to do that for them tomorrow.
Okay, well, I think that's a very strong analysis, as we've come to expect from you, Sheikh Imran Hosein, the Islamic world's leading eschatologist and analyst of contemporary affairs. I certainly hope your view of the coming Great War turns out not to be the case, but unfortunately there's plenty of evidence, apparently both from Scripture and from what we see every day in the news, that you very likely could be right about this. So in any case, whatever Allah brings us in this world, I thank you, and may Allah bless you for your truth-speaking and truth-seeking, and I look forward to future contact with you, inshallah.
Thank you, Kevin, and may Allah protect you, and I admire the work that you're doing, and there are many, many, many people in the world, like me, who admire the work that you're doing, admire your courage, who admire your integrity, admire the brilliance of your analysis of contemporary affairs, and may Allah protect you and increase you in wisdom and knowledge.
Barakallahu feek.
Ameen. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.